Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Starting Small Music Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McCormick, and today we have a very special guest. We have David Dorn, four-time ACM nominee for Keyboard Player of the Year. You've heard David playing keys all over country radio on the hit songs of Luke Bryan, Jimmie Allen, Rodney Atkins, and many more. I've actually had the pleasure of working with David in the studio. He recorded on my first EP, and I can truly say that he is one of the most talented and nice people in the industry. You're going to hear his story of growing up in South Carolina and how he secured the job as the organist at his church at only 8 years old. You're really going to learn a lot in this episode, and I'll see you at the end. Everybody, and welcome to the Starting Small Music Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McCormick, and today we have four-time nominee for ACM Keyboard Player of the Year, David Dorn. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So where did you grow up and where were you first introduced to music?
Man, I grew up in South Carolina, and interestingly enough, man, I was introduced to music from an early age. Like, my parents aren't musicians necessarily, but my dad had a piano in the house, and so apparently, like, I would get up on the piano even in diapers and like pluck around, and I was able to hear the notes on there, and I could pick out my cartoons that I like to watch and play the melodies from them. And my dad was like, "Oh, that seems like maybe that's something we should experiment with." And so he got me piano lessons at 4 years old, man. And like I kind of never stopped from that point on. So
Do you always remember enjoying it and like being very passionate about when you were going to lessons, or were you ever in a phase where you're like, man, like, are you guys making me do this? Or was it always something you were like passionate and like also were
man,
really good at it?
yeah, I always loved the music. Like, it was always part of it. You know, lessons weren't always the most enjoyable thing. I remember pretty early on, my piano teacher, learned that I could play by ear. And then she realized that I had perfect pitch. So she was like, "All right, we're going to have to fix all of this." So she's like, "You're going to have to play the notes that are on the page." So I remember that being sort of tricky because I would just memorize things and like play them back. And she knew I was doing that. And so she was like, "You're not going to do that. You're going to learn to read the music."
Well, I bet you and Charlie Puth would go crazy in the studio with both of your perfect pitches working together.
Oh gosh, man, I don't know. Crazy is one word for it.
So who are some for sure. So who are some of the first bands you remember really resonating with and like deep diving into their music as a kid?
Well, interesting enough, like, I grew up in a pretty conservative home, so my mom didn't really want us to have like rock records. So it was always me sort of like trying to navigate this sort of we listened to a lot of CCM, but the first like band that in that world that really made me go, "Oh, this is cool," was DC Talk. And I remember that first record we put out was like crazy for me. It was like, what is this? And so at that point, I was starting to really find some other music. I listened to the Beatles, and that was like, "Oh, okay, this is amazing." And my dad was always like, "Go listen to the Beatles." My mom was an Elvis fan, which was interesting. Like, she loved his gospel stuff, and so I learned a lot of gospel music growing up. And then I kind of shifted into a more like pop rock world. I was always into, I think the Beatles thing put me into the Brit rock mode. So I feel like I've always kind of lived in this sort of pop rock thing. And interesting enough, I always grew up around country music. So
Totally,
I had that background just because of where I grew up. And I learned a lot of like classic country. My mom loved country music. So I kind of was immersed in all of it. And then because I was studying piano, I was learning classical music along the way, and I actually think that was a really good thing. Learning classical music really helped shape my understanding of pop music and rock music and what was happening there. And then I kind of found myself into a more like the Radiohead phase that I went through, that a lot of us probably hit, and a lot of that 90s alt rock music I just loved. So
yeah, totally.
I feel like I was around a lot of it. I was really fortunate that I was exposed to a lot of different music growing up, even though I sometimes had to search it out and find records that my mom didn't want me to have and hiding CDs under my bed.
That's awesome, man. So when did you start, did you ever like playing any bands in high school? Were you playing live or in church or any aspect like that?
I started at church playing. When I was 8 years old, I became a substitute organist at my church.
Wow. Did it,
Which
did it
is
have all the
hilarious.
pedals and everything too? Or
It did have all the pedals. Yeah. Now I didn't play the pedals early on, but then one of my piano teachers was also an organist. And so she was like, you need to learn how to play organ. So I started to learn to play organ. And even today, I've been at a church in Nashville for 17 years. I play pipe organ on Sundays more,
oh wow,
Sunday morning.
beautiful.
Yeah. So kind of had this crazy existence of different worlds, feeding kind of different places my whole life. And so, and then I played in bands, had a band in college that I played with, and we were doing like just kind of like pop rock stuff. And then I actually, when I moved to Nashville, I was in a band called Calico Trail. It was a 7-piece like Eagles Americana Tom Petty thing.
Oh, awesome.
And we ended up getting signed to a record deal, and then that record deal fell through pretty quickly because the label closed down. And but interestingly enough, like I use all those guys on records that I'm producing, and we're still buds. So we still play music together, which is awesome.
Totally.
But then I kind of shifted from the band thing into the session world.
So what was that like? What was there a specific instance that happened that made you take that leap to move to Nashville? And what did those first years look like for you? Like, how did you meet up with these guys? Were you already with them before you moved to Nashville?
No, I came to Nashville cold, man. Like I had nobody that I knew, but I came up and finished school at Belmont. So I did 2 years at Belmont University, finished piano program there. Got my classical piano performance degree from Belmont.
Oh, awesome.
And I always looked at Belmont as like a networking tool. So I used that time there to really just find a group of people that I loved working with. And I didn't live on campus. So at that time while I was at Belmont, I was starting to try to find gigs and play shows with other artists around town. Just, making some extra money, getting to know people, learning about other musicians in town. And I think that was a really big part of my coming up, was the fact that I met a lot of people that I still work with today, like that.
Totally.
It's crazy that we've all kind of come up in our own way. But a lot of those musicians that I was playing with early on, we still work together even in the studio, So what really made me come to Nashville was like, I had gone to New York. I love New York. It's a great city, but I didn't see myself working there. I didn't want to necessarily be playing piano on Broadway shows. That just wasn't what I really loved musically. And the LA thing just didn't feel like that's where I wanted to be, So it was a pretty easy decision for me to come to Nashville. Plus, I had come up before and was just mesmerized by the amount of talent that I saw. I went out to just see some shows like we all do when we come to Nashville the first time. It's like, go look at the people playing down on Broadway or whatever. And it's just like, holy smokes, man, all these people are great.
Right.
They're really good, and then you realize it's even deeper than that when you get here and you start to really get immersed in it. So Nashville was always kind of like the obvious choice for me to come be a part of,
Totally. So what year did you fully transition into being a session player? And after all the years of doing it, how do you keep yourself inspired and like in a mind that's still able to create? I feel like some people, like the average musician, might get burnt out. How do you keep going?
Right. Well, interestingly enough, man, like my sort of path to session playing is unique. Like I actually wasn't planning on ever being a session player. I was coming more from a writer producer standpoint. When I graduated college, I started a studio on Music Row and was just doing production and writing 100 songs plus a year for 3 years straight. But in that time, I was building demos early on, like in 2008, 2009. I would do a lot of the demos for songs I was writing on and with other writers that I worked with. And people started hearing there like, hey man, can I get you to come play keys on some of my stuff? So I had a couple writers that would ask me to come play keyboards on their sessions. And of course, I'm the young kid that nobody knows anything about with all these heavy hitter session musicians, but somehow I my way through, or I made it through those and got called back. And so I kind of shifted into being a full-time session player, I guess, in about 2011, 2012. So it was a 4 to 5 year stint after college where I was just sort of figuring out who I was, what I was doing. I always was involved with studio. Like that's always been a love of mine. Even when I was back home in South Carolina, I worked playing sessions. Although I didn't really know anything about sessions, I just would get called to come into the studio to play keyboards on
Oh,
stuff,
wow.
some CCM records and stuff like that were happening there. Had a guy that was near my hometown that helped me a lot because he had a home studio and he taught me a lot of things about that. But I was more interested actually in just being an engineer and a producer and that sort of thing. But I think that shaped me as a player and made me a better player because I was listening to things maybe a little bit differently. And so anyway, to answer the follow-up part of that question, Justin, it's like, you know, we're all going to have days where it's hard to reinvent the wheel, you know, like, and that's what we're a lot of times trying to do. You know, we're trying to find something unique and creative on songs. Sometimes it's like, man, I played the same progression 8 times this week, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, it's like there's always something to learn, man. I never stop learning. I'm always listening to music. I'm always sort of just like investigating what other people are doing, what sounds are being used, how are people approaching songs. And I think that's sort of that producer mentality that as session players we even have to have. Like, we're mini producers in our own right because we're taking care of our chairs, we're taking care of our parts, making sure that everything's placed the way that it should be and listening into all those things, and then interpreting what an artist and a producer on the other side of the glass is trying to ask for and get, you know. And so all these things are things that we're always learning, man. We never stop learning. The day I stop learning is the day I quit music, period. Like, there's always something to learn there.
I totally
You know?
agree. And I totally agree with like how you said that as a session musician, you basically are a producer on the project. Cause like the producers, when they come in, they're not delegating you exactly what you have to play. They're putting their trust in you that you're going to produce your section of the sound. And they trust that the guys you play with every day can work off each other. Like when you guys are all playing your own parts. So that's totally a great scenario.
Man.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is there any specific projects? I mean, you've been on so many hit records at this point. Is there any specific projects or artists that like you're very proud of, like in like the huge aspect of your career?
I'll be honest with you, man. I'm proud of any time that I get to be on something that's released, you know. I mean, and even, and I'll say this, even on demos that I've played on for songwriters that over the years, it's like I'm proud of those things too, because we might have shaped the song that made that songwriter's career open up. You know what I mean? Those, anytime that the music that we walk out of the studio and we've left something where we feel like, hey man, that we created something today. We found something that's really special. Those are the days you live for. I mean, that doesn't happen every day, you know. Even on hit records, we don't always have that happen.
Right.
But there are those moments where you walk out and everybody in the room knows, man, that was magic. Like, that was whatever just happened, whatever we created, that was magic. And that's what, to me, it's like all the accolades and all these sort of, you know, things that get tied into the artists that we work with, which, you know, all of us are so thankful and grateful to be part of. But to me, the special moments are like when you walk into the control room, you listen back and you're like, everybody knows it. It's undeniable. Like, we just created something special. That's what you're living for. And you know, and also just getting to play with the best musicians in the world, man. Every day I get to be in with some of the best musicians that, you know, you're ever going to meet, man. And like making sure that you're playing up to the standard that you feel like you left it all on the floor, that they're not going to look and say, Dorn didn't play his best today. Like, he didn't come in and bring it today. Like, all these things, that's what I really cherish about being a session player. Because, you know, as a producer, you get that moment, but then you walk away and you have to take that track and you're going to live with it and listen to it 100+ times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we get that moment and it's a really sort of quick in the moment section, you know, like I don't even know how to explain this. Like, you get maybe 30 minutes of like, wow, we created this, and then you walk away from it and that's it. But I love you, everybody knows those moments and they're so special, man. And a lot of songs I've been part of, I feel like, you know, hit songs and not hit songs have been that. And so anyway, that's kind of a convoluted answer to that question, but I feel like that's what I live for, you know.
Oh, that's awesome. And like, as a player, it seems like you're with a lot of the same guys a lot of the time on your records. And a guy you constantly see is your buddy Justin Ostrander. And in 19, you released a 3-song project called Inspired with him and Mark Lonesway. And man, I checked that out in preparation for this interview, and like I thought it was so cool. It has such an Owl City vibe to it.
Yeah.
What was the process like of you guys wanting to put this music out under your name? And like, what was like, are you guys going to do more music going forward?
Well, so we actually have a production company together, the three of us. Yeah. And we do like film, TV stuff. So Warner Chappell hires us out to do these projects, and they allow us to write everything, produce everything. And it ends up going to them as far as like music that they pitch for us and to put into just to put into TV film world. And man, we've all been creative. Like Justin and Mark are a perfect example of people that I met early on, and I still work with to this day. Obviously, we have a company together, and so we still write today. We literally wrote 2 weeks ago, and we're writing music and constantly trying to like find our own things, because I think that, you know, all of us as session musicians or whatever, we all have our own sort of like, we're mini artists in the way too. You know, we all have something to bring to the table as far as our own creativity and ability to create. So I think it's important to actually write your own music and put it out there, even if it's just instrumental music. Maybe you're not a singer, you know, it's like, I'm not the greatest singer, but I love writing, you know, I love writing music. I love even writing just songs in general, you know, but so anyway, that all came from sort of being hired a bit to do it. And then we've kind of continued that process on of just releasing music together. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I definitely think you guys should release more projects, man.
Oh, dude. Well, thank you, man.
So kind of, yeah, no problem. So to kind of wrap up, what is your advice to those people that's dream it is to maybe specifically be a session musician, to be the next David Dorn, to be the next Justin Ostrander? What is your advice to those people in high school or on the come up right now?
Well, you know, I mean, the biggest thing that I can say is listen to music. Listen to everything you can find, because, you know, as a player, it's looking for inspiration, one, but learning from people that have already do it. And you know, like, so many great records been made, and like start to actually like dissect what a record is. What are the sounds going on? What are these parts? Why is this part being done? So these are things that you can do on your own. This is like homework assignments that you can just do. And we all love music anyway. So just listening to music, but not just as a casual fan, but actually like listening into the music, learning parts, learning how to play what's there, try to get sounds that are super close to what you're hearing. And then, you know, also I think it's really important that you can come up with together. I think in the music industry right now, it's like finding a group of people that can all kind of push each other is really important, man. It's like finding your group, find people that are like-minded. Even in cities, you might not be in Nashville, you know, but you found somebody that's a great musician in your town. There's other people that love music equally. Go out there and start playing, even if it's just to say, hey, come over to the house. We're gonna try to break down this song, learn something about it. It's taking that type of initiative. And then, you know, if you really want to be a session player, I think you do have to move to one of the major music towns. I think that's just kind of part of it. That's not always the case, but I you know, the reality is a lot of the stuff that's done is in Nashville or LA, maybe more in Nashville than any other place, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
Now we have these sort of opportunities in like Sound Better and these remote sites. Get on there, like put yourself out there, force yourself to almost like just have to get in it and do it, you know. And then you know, the biggest thing that I would say is like you practice because you want to be better. Like you don't have to be told to practice. You practice because that's just innately you want to be a better version of yourself, musician. The thing that you have to really practice and hone in on is being a better networker, being out there and meeting people, trying to actually say, hey, I've got something to offer, you know, and then following up on that. And so, yeah, that's my advice, man. Hopefully that helps somebody.
Awesome. David, I think that and your story is super inspiring. Thank you so much for joining the show today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, my conversation with David Dorn. David, thank you again so much for joining the podcast. Everyone go stream his project In Spirit out right now on all streaming platforms, and follow him on Instagram at David Dorn Music. And make sure to come back next week and listen to my conversation with David Schultz, the tour manager for Jimmie Allen. You You can also check out Starting Small Music on YouTube at Starting Small Music and see all the video content from all of our interviews. Follow Starting Small Music on Instagram at Starting Small Music and let us know who you'd like to hear on the podcast next. And remember, everyone starts small.